Alright guys, I'm going to read this story today. It's called Ida B and Her Plans to Maximize Fun, Avoid Disaster, and Possibly Save the World by Katherine Hannigan. It's illustrated by Steven Mach. I think that's how you pronounce his name, right? Is realistic fiction. Fiction is a pretend story, but if it's realistic, it makes it sound like it almost really could have happened, right? But someone wrote this story. So, we're going to ask our essential question before we start reading. What experiences can change the way you see yourself and the world around you? Right, so we're going to read this story. This story is actually taken from a much longer book. It has 32 chapters in the original book. They're kind of short chapters, but so this is a little summary of what we've missed in the chapters we didn't read, right? This is just in our reading book, so it's kind of a long one, but they shortened it to make it a little part of the story. It's called an excerpt from the book. All right, so we're going to learn about what happened so far. Ida B is an independent girl who loves spending time in her family's apple orchard. Unfortunately, Ida B's world turns upside down when her mother is diagnosed with cancer. Her parents are forced to sell part of the orchard to pay medical bills, which means that many of Ida B's beloved trees will be cut down to make room for houses. But that's just the beginning. Ida B finds out that her days of being homeschooled are coming to an end and that she must attend public school. Upset by her mother's illness and her parents' decisions, Ida B stubbornly decides to distance herself from her parents and new classmates. Instead, she chooses to spend her time with her dog, Rufus, and cat, Lulu. But through the persistence and encouragement of her teacher, Mrs. W, Ida B's iron will begins to dissolve. Right, so this is a story about a little girl, and her mom has cancer. So in order to pay for the cancer to the hospital and all the bills, they're going to have to sell some of her apple orchard. Right, an orchard is a place that has a bunch of trees. So she has an apple orchard. I could have an orange orchard, a lemon orchard, whatever kind of trees I have. She has an apple orchard, and she's not happy about this. She decides that she's so mad at her parents that she is just not going to talk to anyone, right? She's going to decide she's going to distance herself from everyone, her new classmates. Right now she has to go to public school. She used to be homeschooled. She learned at home. But now she's having to go to public school. She's not going to be friends with the kids. She's going to spend time with her dog, Rufus, and her cat, Lulu, instead. The only person, she has a teacher that's very persistent and encourages her. The teacher's name is Ms. W, right? And her iron, right? You could picture iron is very strong. It's like that black wrought iron I make fences out of. It's very strong. It begins to dissolve. If something dissolves, it falls apart in pieces, right? If something dissolves, I put things in water to make them dissolve. All right, so that's our introduction to the story. So now we're going to go to a chapter and read some chapters. All right, and this is in your book, in your literature anthology, right? The big reading book. It starts on page 346. And I'm on to 348. So I'm not going to show the pictures so much, but you can look in your book and see them. You all have your books at home. All right, one day after lunch, Ms. W told the class, "I know it's time to read, but I don't think I can do it today. My voice is too tired." Right? This is a class. They have reading time after lunch. She put her hand on her throat and scrunched up her face like something was paining her. It was the same face she'd make when Simon Martini was just about yelling across the room to Patrice Polinsky. And Mrs. W would say, "Simon, use your inside voice. You are hurting my ears." Right? She'd make that same face, letting him know her ears were hurting when he's screaming in the classroom. Everybody looked up from their chattering or worksheets at just about the same time, in exactly the same direction, with the same expression on their faces, a mix of 30% shock, 20% disbelief, and 50% plain old sad, right? Here's a little math for us. Did they add their percentages up to 100? I always need 100. 30 plus 20 plus 50, right? 30 plus 20 is 50, and 50 plus 50 is 100. They did it, right? Some people were in shock. They couldn't believe it. Other people were in disbelief, which is also just another word for shock. They just don't believe it, right? And the other 50% were just sad. "Aw, man," Matthew Dribble said right out loud. "I felt like the bottom had just dropped out of my stomach, and everything I ate for lunch was tumbling around in my gut." Right? She's so upset. She wants to hear her teacher read. The way she describes it, right? When your stomach's just feeling weird, a weird way. "Nope, my voice is just too tired," Miss W said. And sure enough, it was sounding weak and raspy. Right? When your voice is raspy, it sounds like you have a frog in it. "And we are going to read Alexandra Potemkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z, too." Well, that's disappointing, right? You could tell the teacher likes the book because she says, "Oh, we were going to read this book. It's disappointing she's not going to be able to read it." Miss W sat down, put her head on her hand, and her body wilted. Right? If something wilts like a flower, when a flower wilts, it starts to die. Like, not only was her voice tired, but every bone in her body needed a rest. Please, begged Alice May Grunderman. "Please, Ms. Washington," asked Patrice and Simon at the same time, with the same moon-eyed face. And then everybody got the idea, and it became a sort of song with a verse of "Please, Miss Washington," and a chorus of "Please, please, please." Right? The kids are all singing together. But Miss W's voice was deteriorating at an alarming speed, because now she could only speak in a hoarse whisper, and everybody had to stop with their pleasing just to hear her. Right? I put "please" in my parentheses because that's ing. Right? They're saying "please." We're pleasing. They're saying it. I like how this author writes. "I'm sorry, but I can't." She paused, and we could all tell by the look on her face that she was thinking hard. So we stayed quiet to give her some room. "Maybe," she said, looking up and forcing a weak smile, "we could have a guest reader just for today." Well, it was hard to imagine anybody but Miss W reading, and we all just sat there for a minute. Then, one by one, people started nodding their heads and looking at each other and nodding more and smiling, because nobody wanted to miss story time, not even Tina Politi, who usually slept through it. And after a couple of minutes of that, people started looking at Ms. W, nodding their heads real hard, sticking out their chests and saying out loud, "I think that's a great idea," and "Yes, let's have a guest reader today," because they were realizing that maybe they could be the guest reader and the star student of the afternoon. Notice how they said yes with the comma, right? I say yes, comma. They wanted to remind Ms. Washington that not only were they superb readers, right? Superb is even better than superb. They weren't super readers, they were superb readers, but wonderful human beings too, right? They're doing their teacher a favor by reading because she can't read. They're trying to show off or let her know, to give them an A. Especially Calvin, big-headed Faribault, who actually raised his hand, and I just knew it was to volunteer out of the kindness of his big, fat, big-headed heart. Do you think she really likes Calvin? Do you really think she thinks he's kind? But Mrs. W didn't even look in Calvin's direction. "Ida, since I know you've read the book," she said to me weakly, like it was her last request, "could you please read the first chapter today?" Right? If usually someone gives you the last request, it's like something's going to happen to them. That's the last thing they're ever going to ask of you. Well, I was so shocked and embarrassed, sitting there with my mouth wide open, that I almost couldn't tell that all the other kids were staring at me with their mouths wide open too. Making words into story music like Ms. W did was the one thing I wanted to do more than just about anything in the world. Right? Some people like to read, some don't. But telling a story out loud in front of my class at Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School was nearly the last thing I'd want to do in my entire life. I was so confused about whether I should be happy or scared, I just sat there. Miss W got up, walked over to me, put her face next to my stunned and frozen one. Right? Stunned and frozen. If you're stunned, you're just, you can see her face like, "What?" And whispered, "Ida, I need your help." And there I was, hypnotized by that woman again. I was like a dog that would go fetch Miss W's stick, even if it was in a snake's hole under a thorn bush that had just been sprayed by a skunk. Right? You could imagine a snake hole, right? We were talking about fears even just today. A thorn bush, right? A bush that has pokey thorns on it. And it was sprayed by a skunk, this stick, but she still would go get it for her teacher. So, how will Ida respond to Miss W's request? You think she's going to do it? Look for details in the story to make a prediction, right? She would even go fetch her teacher's stinky stick in a snake hole, and while she's getting poked. I looked at Miss W, just scared now, because I knew I was going to do it, but I didn't know how. "I know you'll be great," she croaked, right, like the sound a frog makes. And in my head, I was already trotting off, looking for that stick, even though I could smell the stink and the thorns were pricking me. "Do you want to sit there or in my chair?" Ms. W asked. "I'll sit here," I mumbled. She set the book down on my desk, brought her chair over, sat down next to me, put her head back, and closed her eyes. "Whenever you're ready, Ida," she rasped. Ms. W had given me quite a few books to read already, because it only took me 1 or 2 days at the most to read them, unless I was working on my Terrify the People Who Bought Our Land project. Alexandra Potemkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z was my favorite so far. It was Rufus's favorite too. Remember her dog in the beginning, right? It told us a little bit about all the parts we missed. We didn't get to read about her and her dog at all yet. I got tingly in my fingers thinking about opening up the book and reading those words out loud, making my voice go high and low, rough and smooth, like I did in my room, right? We could tell she reads to herself in her room out loud, and she could make her voice go up and down and rough and smooth, and she's thinking about it, but it's making her so nervous that she can even feel her fingers tingling. But my legs were shivering like they were in a blizzard, and my stomach was flipping forward, then backward, thinking about all those people looking at me and hearing my voice. She knows she's a good reader, right? But she's just nervous to do it in front of people. She likes to read. I closed my eyes, put my right hand on top of the book, and passed it lightly over across the cover. It was cool and smooth, like a stone from the bottom of the brook, and it stilled me, right? Some things from the bottom of the brook, bottom of a river, bottom of a little stream. So it calmed her, right? She felt like she's touching the book, and it was nice and cool, and it's calming her down. A whole other world is inside there, I thought to myself, and that's where I want to be. I opened the book and got ready to read the title, but I could feel everybody's eyes on me, crowding me so there was hardly any air. Right? They didn't take away the air. She just felt like that. She's using her senses to describe things, right? She feels the cold of the book. She feels like she can't breathe. She feels tingly in her fingers. She even described a scent earlier, right? Like something had been sprayed by a skunk. She's using a lot of descriptive senses to tell us the story. The only sound that came out of me were little peeps, like a baby bird chirping. Alexandra Pumpkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z. So we know our answer. Is she going to read it? Yep, she's starting to. Let's see what happens. Ms. Washington, with her eyes still closed, leaned over and whispered, "You'll have to read louder, honey, so everyone can hear." "Yes, ma'am," I whispered back. I took a deep breath, filled my stomach up with air, and then made my muscles squeeze it out, so I pushed a big gust of wind over my voice box and out my mouth. "Chapter 1, I bellowed, right? If you're bellowing, you're kind of loud. You're kind of screaming. My voice was so loud it surprised me, and I jumped back a little in my chair. But nobody laughed. They were listening. The book is about Alexandra, and her parents think she is quite difficult, but actually she is a genius who's assisting the also genius scientist, Professor Zelinsky, in her quest to explore the lost planet Z. Alexandra gets in some trouble, but really she is just a very focused person. At first, I was worrying about all those people watching and listening, but after a few minutes, I left that classroom and went into the story. I was in Alexandra's laboratory instead of at school, and I was just saying out loud everything I saw her do or felt her feel. I let my voice tell the way she did it and saw it and felt it, right? Which is just what Ida's doing here, right? She's telling us what she feels. She's letting us know this story is in first person. She's telling her own story and letting us know all about her, what she sees, what she feels, what she's doing. But she's reading a different story. And I was so looking forward to seeing what happened next, I forgot that I was reading. All of a sudden, it was the end of the chapter, and it was like I was snatched out of a dream and couldn't quite recall where I was. I looked around, and I saw I was sitting at a desk. There was a book in front of me. Kids were staring at me, and I slowly remembered. I glanced over at Miss W., and she smiled and whispered, "Thank you very much, Ida. That was lovely." I handed Miss W. back the book, and we got back to work, and everything was just like always, except that Miss W. had to write all the instructions on the board instead of talking them. At study time, when I went to Ronnie's desk, he looked right in my eyes and said, "You read real good, Ida." And this time it was me staring down at my shoes like they might disappear if I didn't keep watching them. Right, another way, she's nervous, she's shy, she's looking at her shoes, right? Her shoes aren't going to disappear if she doesn't look at them. That's how closely she's looking at her shoes. My throat got stopped up so I could hardly say, "Thank you." Nothing was different except the warm glow that was in my belly and my arms and my legs and my head and wouldn't go away. Even on the long, cruddy bus ride home, right? Now she has a warm glow, much different than her nervousness before, right? When she was feeling things like they're shifting in her stomach. So how does Ida B respond to the challenge of reading in front of the class? Right? She doesn't want to do it, but she does it anyway. What does this tell you about her? Right? She wanted to make her teacher happy, but she also knows how to read, and she wanted to read. Right? And one way we can tell, it asks here, sorry, how can you tell that she was feeling like that? Right? It said here, she was just so absorbed in the book. She felt like she was part of the book reading it. She even forgot where she was in the classroom. All right, so now she's going home. "How was school today, Ida B?" Mama and Daddy would ask me every day after I went back to Ernest B. Lawson Elementary School. And every day I'd say, "It was okay," which now also stood for overwhelming calamity, right? She's abbreviating. Overwhelming means it's just huge. A calamity is when something bad happens. Okay, it was okay. "Well, what did you do?" And I would just tell them the facts, hard and cold, like my heart, right? If your heart is hard and cold, you're not happy. "We had English, then we had science, then we went to the gym," with no ups or downs or any part of the real me in there. Right? She'd been ignoring her parents. It was the same thing every day, and it was so boring and old and dry like stale bread. I couldn't believe they kept trying for as long as they did. After a while, though, they gave up. They'd just say, "How are you doing, Ida B?" "Okay," I'd mumble, and that would be it. I didn't think they needed any more words than that to let them know that there was nothing close to joy floating around inside me. Right? She was so mad, so sad about having to go to public school and the apple orchard getting torn down. But this day was different. The good feeling I had from reading that story out loud had been growing bit by bit all afternoon, till it ended up being a full-blown happiness by the time I got home. I'd keep thinking about what I did and how it felt, and the warm brightness in me would get bigger and stronger and shinier every time. My legs wanted to skip down the drive instead of walk. My mouth wanted to smile instead of scowl. My arms wanted to hug somebody instead of holding my backpack to my chest like a shield. My heart was horrified. That happiness would not be satisfied staying inside me either. It wanted to be shared, and it didn't mind who it shared itself with, including Mama and Daddy. I could just imagine having dinner with the two of them and all kinds of good feelings spilling out of me. There I'd be, grinning and gabbing, right, if you're gabbing, you're talking. And the next thing you'd know, Mama and Daddy would be thinking that I had transformed into my old perky self, right? This is how I can tell she used to be a happy person, right? She was going back, she was transforming, she was changing back into her old perky self. That school was the best thing that ever happened to me, and maybe everything had worked out just fine after all. And that would not be acceptable, right? She's like, I can't be happy. That's not acceptable. I was not going to let that happiness compromise my stand that, even though good things might happen in the world from time to time, nothing was right in my family or in my valley. So I tried to get rid of some of it before dinner time by telling Rufus and Lulu about my out loud reading adventure. I sat them both on my bed, and while Lulu glared at Rufus with the deadliest disdain, she doesn't like, the cat is not looking at the dog very happily. I told them my story. 2 thumps of Rufus's tail and a bored yawn from Lulu, though didn't quiet that feeling down at all. Right, she's telling her cat and dog what happened today. By the time I sat down at dinner, the happiness was doing somersaults of excitement in my stomach. It was jiggling with delight at the prospect of telling Mama and Daddy about my day. I was itching to talk about how pleased I was with Ms. W. and the story she gave me, and reading Alexander Potchkin and the Space Shuttle to Planet Z most of all. It even wanted to start chatting about Ronnie. Right, we don't know about Ronnie so much because we didn't read the rest of the book. I tried to get away before any of my pleasure leaked out of me. I'm not hungry. Can I be excused? I asked. Daddy, however, was prepared to spoil my plan. You need to eat your dinner, Ida B., he said. Eat a little bit, honey, Mama added. Well, by that point my heart was beating extra hard, trying to keep the happiness down and quiet, and it was losing ground fast. I realized I'd have to let some of it out so I could rein the rest of it in and get control of my insides again. I focused on my carrots, lining them up with my fork vertically, then tiny tidbit of cheer, and I released, one tiny tidbit of cheer. She let it out, right? She's putting her carrots vertically and then horizontally and then zigzag around her plate, just kind of moving her food around. I read a book out loud in my class today, I said, struggling to keep my voice low and even. Daddy looked up and stared, like he didn't quite know what to do with a bit of conversation from me. Oh, Ida B., did you like it? Mama asked, smiling at me. I just nodded my head. What did you read? Mama kept on. Just a book about a girl. I told those carrots, right? She's not looking at her parents. She's trying still not to let them know she's happy and she's good again. She's just talking to the carrots. Did you know the book, or was it the first time you read it? I read it before. Were you scared reading in front of all those people, Ida B.? I shrugged, like it was not a big deal. I could hardly recall. Not really. Sorry, I read that wrong. I shrugged, like it was such a not big deal. I could hardly recall. Right, she can't even remember. Not really. She's playing it off. You can see that smile on her face. Was it wonderful, baby? Mama asked. And as soon as Mama said it, I felt every drop of goodness from reading that story. It flooded my insides, and I couldn't stop the happiness from pouring out of me. Yes, I said. Then I looked right at Mama for the first time in what seemed like forever, and she wasn't looking at me, but into me. She was pulling me to her with her eyes, like she used to do. All of a sudden, I could see the light that was Mama's shining out of her eyes. I couldn't help smiling at it. Be careful, my heart warned me. Oops, sorry. but I was having a hard time remembering that there was anything to be careful about, because if I just looked at Mama's eyes and not at her bald head or her pale skin, I could tell that the part of her I thought had gone away forever was still there, and glowing only from deep down inside her. So here's my question. Visualize, how does Ida B's behavior toward her parents change? Right? She's been mean and grumpy to them and not really smiling. And now she's trying to be nice again and be friendly with her parents. So this is just a part of the story. So if you liked it, I wonder if Mrs. Pisers would have it in the library, because it is an award-winning book. So let's go read about the author. She is Katherine Hannigan. She spent her childhood in western New York, where she used her imagination to create stories with the dolls in her closet, or paper characters cut from Valentine's. Years later, after earning a college degree in painting, she moved to Iowa to teach. Her new surroundings, which included several apple trees, inspired her to write Ida B. Like Ida B, Katherine is an animal lover who owns a pet cat. However, the author doesn't see herself as being exactly like her storybook heroine. She says, hers is the life I would have chosen if I could have, and I think I try to live up to her example. Brave and true, full of fun and fiercely loving. All right, and here is our author's purpose. Why do you think the author chose to write Ida B's from Ida B's point of view? How did this help you understand the character? Right, if we learn it from Ida B, we could see how sad she was and how happy she became when she really just let her true self be. I think it also, what experiences can change the way you see yourself and the world around you, right? That's what is happening to her. She had a horrible thing. It kind of tells us she was a happy kid until her mom got cancer and they had to sell the orchard. They didn't have to sell all of it. They just had to sell part of it, right? So she still had some orchard. She had to go to a public school instead of being homeschooled. And so that kind of changed her, but reading out loud in her classroom made her happy again. So this is the story of Ida B.